Millionaire saw his maid crying naked in the pool on security camera and changed her life forever. Lucas Hart wasn't the kind of man who stayed up late without a reason. His life followed a schedule as precise as the buildings he designed, structured, intentional, and devoid of chaos. But that night, sleep refused to come. He sat alone in his study, a half-finished glass of whiskey sweating on the table, the soft light reflecting off blueprints he hadn't touched in hours. The modern hillside home overlooking Lake Washington was cloaked in silence, not peaceful silence, but the kind that echoed, that kind that scraped against the edges of a man's thoughts. Out of habit, not need, Lucas picked up the remote and turned on the security monitor. He flipped through the feeds until the backyard appeared. The pool glowed softly under the underwater lights, its surface calm, quiet. But in the middle of the water, there was a figure. He leaned closer. At first, he thought it was a reflection, some trick of the light. But as the image sharpened, his breath caught. Aria Morales, the live-in housekeeper who had worked in his home for nearly a year, was in the pool. Not cleaning, not working. She was sitting in the water, completely naked, arms wrapped tightly around herself, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She didn't know anyone was watching. She didn't expect anyone ever would. Her long, dark hair clung to her back. Her skin was pale beneath the muted glow. Her body was still, except for the occasional tremor, as if grief itself had taken physical form and held her there. Lucas should have looked away. It would have been the right thing, the decent thing. But he couldn't. Not because she was naked, but because her sorrow filled the space around her like the water, quiet, suffocating, and utterly real. He had seen that kind of pain before, in the mirror, after Amelia died, after the life he knew collapsed into silence and shadows. Abruptly, Lucas turned off the monitor. His hand trembled slightly as he set down the remote. He closed his eyes, but the image replayed again and again, like rain falling in his memory. That night, he didn't sleep. Aria Morales had been working in Lucas's home for nearly a year, and until that night, she had been nearly invisible to him. She was part of the background, a quiet presence in the quiet world he had built to escape memory and emotion. She was always on time, always polite, always silent. She moved through the house like smoke, leaving no trace behind. She wiped down every surface, folded towels into perfect squares, changed bed linens without a sound. Lucas used to think he liked order, but now he realized what he had built wasn't order. It was emptiness in disguise. After that night, he began to notice the things he had once missed. Her eyes were red in the mornings, not from allergies, as he had once assumed, but from crying. She flinched slightly when he entered a room unexpectedly, like someone caught doing something wrong. And sometimes, while watering the plants or wiping the counters, she would hum a Spanish lullaby, soft and slow, like a memory no one was allowed to touch. Lucas didn't know what he was looking for. He only knew that since the moment by the pool, he couldn't go back to not looking. One morning, he lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, holding a coffee cup, eyes fixed on the doorway, as if waiting for something he couldn't name. Aria walked in. Same gray uniform, hair tied back, eyes downcast. "Good morning," she said quietly, then moved toward the sink. He didn't respond, just gave a small nod. Something in his chest tightened, like her sorrow had shape now, and it had begun to wrap itself around him. From that day, his routine changed, subtly but intentionally. He began adjusting his schedule to match hers. If she cleaned the study at 9, he made sure to be there 10 minutes earlier. If she did laundry in the afternoon, he happened to pass by. It wasn't about control. It wasn't even about curiosity anymore. It was about presence, about not letting someone drift away unseen. One afternoon, while watering plants on the second-floor balcony, he saw her in the backyard. No cleaning supplies, no tools, just standing still, looking at the pool. The same pool where he'd first seen her fall apart. She didn't know she was being watched. Her eyes weren't on the water, but through it, as if remembering something the world had forgotten. Lucas didn't call out, didn't interrupt. In that stillness, he understood something. Maybe Arya wasn't working just to survive. Maybe she was holding on, not to her job, but to her place in the world. For years, Lucas had been surrounded by people who wanted something from him: money, status, access. Arya wanted nothing, not even to be seen. And yet, now that he had seen her, truly seen her, he couldn't unsee her. The pool was no longer a place to swim or relax. It had become a mirror, not because of what she had done in it, but because of what it had shown him: a soul quietly breaking apart. And for the first time in years, something inside Lucas stirred. After days of quiet observation, Lucas began breaking the invisible distance between them. Not loudly, not forcefully. He didn't fully understand what he was doing. He only knew that he couldn't keep living the same way, pretending that Arya didn't exist in the same world, under the same roof, carrying a sorrow he once knew intimately. One morning, while she wiped the kitchen counter, he asked, "Do you like the meals the chef makes?" She looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, then lowered her gaze again. "Yes, everything is delicious." He nodded, asked nothing more. Another day, as she passed him in the hallway, he stopped her gently. "Is your room upstairs warm enough? I can have a heater installed if needed." She looked at him for a brief moment, then gave a small, soft smile. "It's warm enough. Thank you." Each question, each small offering, meaningless to anyone else, was an internal struggle for Lucas. He was relearning how to be present, not out of obligation, but out of care. She still didn't initiate conversations, but she no longer avoided him. And when their eyes met now, she didn't look away as quickly as before. Then, one day, Lucas discovered something unexpected. He came home earlier than usual, just as rain began to fall gently over the city. Walking past the hall, he heard the sound of a piano, the notes soft, aching, and beautiful. He stopped. The living room door was slightly ajar. Inside, Arya sat at the piano, her fingers gliding over the keys as if brushing the surface of an old memory. She didn't know anyone was listening. The piece ended with a long, lingering note. She sat still, eyes closed, as if holding on to the breath of something long gone. Lucas stepped into the room. "That was beautiful," she startled, turning quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone—" "It's fine," he said gently. "Don't stop playing." She hesitated, then whispered, "I haven't played in a long time. My fingers don't remember the way they used to." "They seem to remember just fine," he smiled. She told him it was a lullaby her mother used to sing. No title, no sheet music, just something she remembered and pieced together as a child. Lucas sat beside her. For the first time, they spoke not as employer and employee, but as two people holding pieces of something broken. The next day, he left a small package outside her door. Inside, a collection of classical piano sheet music and a folded note. It read, "Play more. This house needs it." No signature, but she knew who it was from. That evening, the piano sang again, slowly, hesitantly, like her heart was learning how to breathe again. From then on, music became their bridge. Arya would play. Lucas would listen, sometimes from the hallway, sometimes sitting beside her. Few words passed between them, but presence was enough. The silence was no longer empty. It became shared space, safe and quiet. What grew between them wasn't born from desire. It was born from understanding, inch by inch, note by note. Arya began to play the piano each evening after the lights in the house had dimmed, after the world had gone quiet. Only the soft golden lamp in the living room cast light over the aged ivory keys. Lucas never asked her to play, but every time the music started, he was there, quietly, faithfully, as if his heart had found a reason to keep beating. One evening she played a piece unlike the others, not classical, not quite folk. It belonged to her. When it ended, she remained still, eyes resting on the keys. Lucas spoke softly. "Did you write that?" She shook her head. "I remembered it from when I was a child. My mother used to sing it to me at night." "It sounds like a gentle goodbye," he said. "Maybe it is," she whispered. Then, as if a door inside her had been blown open by the wind, she said, "I once had a daughter. Her name was Luna." Lucas held his breath. Aria didn't look at him. "She was my entire world. I brought her with me when I left Mexico. It was a difficult journey. No documents, no real plan, just hope. I believed if we could cross the border, I could build a better life. I thought I was strong enough to protect her." Her voice shook. "One day she had a fever. I thought it was just a cold, but it got worse. I didn't have insurance. I was afraid that if I took her to the hospital, they'd find out I had no papers, and they'd take her from me." She paused, swallowed. "So I waited. Too long. When I finally carried her into the ER, they said it was too late." Her breath caught. She died. In my arms. Lucas said nothing. He didn't question. He didn't try to comfort her. He simply sat there, watching her, as if her grief was a fracture in the earth, one he couldn't step over, but couldn't look away from either. Since that night, Aria whispered, "I stopped being a mother. I stopped being anyone. I didn't want to live, but I couldn't die. So I needed to disappear, not to escape, but to make sure I couldn't hurt anyone else." Lucas leaned forward, his gaze never hard, only steady. "And you came here." She nodded. "A house that asked no questions, a job that required no smiles, a place where I could be just a pair of hands holding a cloth, where no one cared who I used to be." Lucas didn't say he was sorry. He didn't reach out to hold her. He didn't offer advice or string together hollow words to ease the ache. He simply sat beside her, silent, steady, like a wooden beam holding firm through a storm. For someone who had lost too much, sometimes the most comforting thing wasn't a word. It was someone who didn't leave. They sat like that for a long while, not looking at each other, not touching, just existing side by side in a shared, unnamed grief. And somehow, in that stillness, Aria didn't feel alone. The next morning, Lucas said nothing about the night before. He started work earlier than usual, didn't leave the house right away. By early afternoon, a doctor arrived, not in a white coat, not with probing questions. He performed a full checkup for Aria, discreetly arranged, no paperwork, no unnecessary details. That same day, a new mattress was delivered, soft, spine-supportive, designed for deep sleep. Fresh clothes appeared neatly folded in her closet, long dresses, warm sweaters, all in muted tones she often wore. Lucas left no note, said nothing. But Aria knew, and what moved her wasn't the generosity itself, but how quietly he did it, without asking for thanks, without needing to be seen. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, a profound respect for the pain she carried, and an unspoken message that whispered, "I see you." After that night when Aria spoke of Luna, there were no more long conversations between her and Lucas. And strangely enough, there didn't need to be. She played more often. He was always there, sometimes sitting quietly on a distant chair, sometimes just leaning against the hallway wall. He never interrupted, never filled the space with unnecessary sound. His presence was a kind of wordless reassurance, and her music was everything she'd never said aloud. Breakfasts became a routine. No one invited the other. No one asked. But every morning, Lucas appeared in the kitchen, awkwardly wrestling with a skillet, and Aria arrived not long after, hair tied neatly, wrapped in muted sweaters, her eyes no longer hollow. They sat across from each other, at first in silence, then in passing phrases. "Looks like it might rain today." "The eggs burned less this time." "You've hated oranges since you were a kid?" Soon they began reading together. Lucas borrowed books from the library. Arya left a favorite novel on the table. They traded pages, offered suggestions, sometimes just sat in the living room, reading side by side. No conversation needed, just presence. One afternoon, while Arya played a soft, meandering tune, Lucas approached the piano. "Will you teach me?" he asked. She looked up, slightly surprised, then nodded. She shifted over, making space for him. "Place your fingers like this." Her hand touched his, warm, careful, as she guided his fingers to the right keys. The notes came slowly, uncertain but honest. Lucas looked down at the keys, then sideways at Arya. She met his gaze, and for the first time, they didn't look away. They didn't pretend to be busy or distracted. They just looked, two people finally seeing each other clearly. No words were exchanged, but in that stillness, silence became a new language. Deep, shared, understood. That night, the rain fell like the soundtrack of an old film, gentle, unrushed, and endless. The house stood still beneath the soft rhythm of water brushing against the glass. The air between them, long free of tension, now felt like silence waiting to be filled. Lucas stood close to Arya, close enough to hear her breathing, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating between them. She looked up at him, eyes steady, unafraid. There was no hesitation in her gaze, no pretense, just quiet clarity. Lucas raised his hand slowly, as if asking without words, "May I?" His fingers brushed her cheek, barely a touch. She didn't pull away. In that moment, everything unsaid hung in the air between them. Old wounds, losses that hadn't fully scarred, quiet fears still curled in the corners of their hearts, and a longing not to be held, but to be seen. When Lucas leaned in, their lips met without urgency. It wasn't heated, it wasn't dramatic, it was soft, careful, true, a touch that whispered, "I'm here. So am I." A kiss with no promises, no pressure, just the fragile human decision to stay, for now and maybe for what comes after. After the kiss, they said nothing. That night passed without promises, without dreams spoken aloud. Only two people sitting in the quiet space they had built. Fragile, but real. The days that followed unfolded like an instrumental melody. Gentle, even, unspoken. They didn't rush to define what was growing between them, perhaps because they both knew the most beautiful things often rise from silence. But peace, no matter how carefully nurtured, rarely lasts. Because the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way back. It began weeks after the night in the rain, just when Lucas thought the fractures in both his and Arya's lives were slowly starting to mend. An unmarked envelope appeared on his office desk. No return address, no sender, just a folded piece of paper printed in bold, cold letters. "I know where she is, and I know who she is. I also know about the kid. You want my silence? Then do what's right. I need money. A lot. If not, I'll let the authorities know." No signature, but Lucas didn't need one. It was him. Luna's biological father, the man Arya had once fled from. Lucas gripped the letter, a chill sweeping down his spine. From what Arya had shared, this man wasn't just a painful memory. He was a shadow that could still destroy everything she'd only just begun to rebuild. He didn't tell her. He didn't want her afraid, didn't want her spiraling back into the dark. So instead, he acted, quietly, precisely. That same day, Lucas called his attorney, hired a private security firm to increase protection around the house. Subtle, but strong. He reached out to a former contact in intelligence to monitor the man's whereabouts. Don't confront him. Just watch. Lucas returned home, business as usual, made breakfast, listened to Arya play, read beside her like nothing had changed. But inside, he was moving pieces across an invisible chessboard where one wrong move could shatter everything. He carried that secret like a grenade, its pin barely held in place. Until Arya found the letter. That morning, Lucas left early for a meeting with his lawyer. In his rush, he forgot a folder on the desk in the library. Arya, tidying up, noticed the slightly open envelope. She wasn't snooping. She just knew. It only took a few lines to make her hands tremble. When Lucas returned that afternoon, the house was unusually still. He walked into his study and found Arya standing there, letter still in hand. She didn't look at him right away, but when their eyes met, the softness was gone. Only hurt remained. "How long were you going to hide this from me?" Her voice was raspy but clear. "Arya!" He stepped closer, voice low. "I was trying to protect you." "By deciding for me?" She cut in, eyes sharp. "I was afraid if you knew. Were you afraid for me or afraid of losing me?" The question hit him like a blade straight to the chest. "I didn't want you hurt again." "And you think hiding this made me safe?" She stepped back. "All I've ever needed, from the beginning, is to be included in my own story." Lucas couldn't speak. "You once saw me, truly saw me." Her voice wavered. "But today, you made me feel like someone who has no right to choose." "I'm sorry," he said quietly. But even as the words left his lips, he knew they weren't enough. She turned, placing the letter back on the desk. "Don't apologize for what you did. Apologize for not believing I was strong enough to know the truth." Then she walked out. No shouting, no tears. But the sound of her footsteps echoed like the slow closing of a door Lucas wasn't sure he'd ever be able to open again. Arya wasn't angry that Lucas wanted to protect her. She understood that. She knew the tenderness in his eyes, the caution in his movements, the silent fear behind everything he hadn't said. And it was precisely because she understood that it hurt even more. Because once again, someone had made a decision for her. Once again, her life had slipped out of her own hands. She had been controlled before, stripped of her right to say no. The man she'd fled was the embodiment of that. And she had sworn, if she survived, she would never let anyone else choose for her again. Lucas, for all the things he had done right, had forgotten the one thing that mattered most, that Arya didn't need a savior. She needed a partner. She needed to be trusted to be strong enough to hear the truth, to be given the choice to face her fear on her own terms. He hid the letter thinking it was love, but all she felt was exclusion. The pain didn't come from what was written in the envelope. It came from the deeper ache of feeling like she had become invisible again, even in the eyes of the one who had once promised to see her. After the confrontation in the study, Arya didn't leave, but she pulled inward, quietly, completely. She no longer played the piano in the evenings. She no longer passed through the kitchen in the early mornings. There were no sizzling pans, no familiar clink of teacups. When they passed each other in the hallway, she didn't stop. Lucas didn't call after her. He didn't try to pull her back. He understood. Some distances couldn't be bridged with apologies. They could only be mended with time. So he gave her space. He remained in the house, went to work, left a book or two on the table like before. But everything had gone still again, like the days before they had ever truly seen one another. And the most painful part wasn't the silence. It was the sense of losing something he had never dared to hope for until it became real. He slept little, didn't listen to music. He kept himself busy with work, with movement, anything to stop his thoughts from spiraling into regret. Then one morning, Lucas walked into the kitchen and stopped cold. Arya was there, Her hair was tied neatly. She wore a soft beige sweater. Her eyes were still tired, but calmer somehow. She was slicing fruit, turned toward the stove with practiced focus. He said nothing, just watched, cautiously stunned, as if one wrong move might break the moment. Arya turned and met his gaze. She set the plate on the counter, wiped her hands on a cloth, and spoke softly. "Can we start again?" Lucas stepped closer, still unsure what was happening. "You don't have to answer," she added quickly. "I just want you to know, I've been thinking. A lot." He nodded, waiting. "I've been going to therapy these past few weeks," she said softly. "At the community center. It's not much, just a few sessions, but they helped. They reminded me I'm still here, that I'm allowed to start again. Not for you. For me." Lucas smiled, small but genuine. "I'm proud of you." She looked at him, her eyes softer now. "I'm not promising to go back to how things were. I'm not even sure I want to. But I'd like to try. Healthier this time. More honest." "Then we'll start again," he said. "Slowly," she added. "Slowly," he agreed. And they sat together at the kitchen table, not as strangers, not quite as lovers, but as two people who had once lost each other. Now choosing to return, not with noise, but with a silence that had finally been understood. From that morning on, neither of them said it out loud, but something had shifted. Lucas didn't ask how long Arya planned to stay, or how she defined what was between them now. He understood that when someone has just stepped out of their own darkness, what they need isn't a structured plan. It's a space safe enough to breathe. As for Arya, she didn't try to become her old self again. She moved slower now, more honestly. She didn't shy away from the empty moments in her heart, but this time she didn't walk through them alone. They didn't start over as strangers. They started over as two people who had known each other's pain. Breakfasts were no longer wordless. Sometimes they talked about the weather, sometimes about nothing at all, but every sentence held real listening. One afternoon, Arya sat in the garden, sketching into a small notebook, the first time in months. Lucas approached, said nothing, just sat beside her. She didn't hide the page. He didn't ask. But he knew that was her way of returning, inch by inch, in her own rhythm. On another evening, she sat at the piano unexpectedly, playing a familiar song, not perfectly, not all the way through, but enough to make Lucas stop in the hallway, lean against the wall, and close his eyes. It reminded him of the first time he had ever heard her play, but this time it wasn't sorrow, it was life. Lucas laughed more now, not the polite, curated kind at business dinners, but real, sudden laughter that slipped out when she said something funny without meaning to. Arya, too, had changed. She began leaving her door open. Her slippers occasionally ended up in the hallway, as if she no longer felt the need to ask permission to exist. Neither of them said what this was, but they both knew. It didn't need a label anymore. It was there, in their presence, in the quiet moments, in the silence that no longer felt cold. One late autumn afternoon, with golden light stretching through the long windows of the living room, Lucas set down a book and said softly, "I've never felt this house so alive." Arya looked at him, then nodded. "Because this time, I'm no longer hiding in it." They didn't speak of the future in dramatic questions, but neither did they avoid it. They bought new blankets together, chose paint colors for the living room, read books side by side when it rained. And then, one day, Lucas asked something very small, but also the biggest thing he'd ever dared to hope for. "Do you want to stay?" "Really stay?" Arya looked at him for a long time. No smile, no hesitation, just a quiet nod. He didn't smile either. He just let out a slow breath, like he'd been holding it for years. "I already have," she said, "for a while now." He didn't ask anything more. because he knew that was the most beautiful yes anyone could receive. A few weeks later, on a crisp, clear morning, when dew still clung to the edge of the grass and the air smelled faintly of wood and wet earth, Lucas pulled a small, simple ring from his pocket. "Not because anything needs to change," he said, "just because I want to mark what already is." Arya didn't need to inspect the ring to know it wasn't expensive, but it fit her finger, fit her heart, fit this moment they had both fought to keep after so much that could have been lost. And so they began planning a wedding. Not elaborate, not loud, just a good weather day, a simple white dress, a small patch of lawn beneath the maple tree, and two people who had once broken apart, now choosing to stay. Their wedding had no fireworks, no loud music, no elaborate menu, or long rows of guests. Just a lawn still damp with morning dew, a few dear friends, and a silent maple tree bearing witness. Arya wore a simple white dress, soft fabric, gently hugging the lines of a body that had once been hidden beneath grief. Her hair was down, makeup minimal, no heels. She walked barefoot across the grass, feeling the earth beneath her feet, the kind of sensation she once feared she'd never feel fully again. Lucas waited beneath the tree, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't wear a designer tuxedo, just a white shirt and the quiet certainty in his gaze. When Arya reached him, they didn't exchange lofty vows. They simply held each other's hands and whispered the simplest thing: "I'm here." "So am I." And that was enough. After the wedding, they didn't jet off to an exotic honeymoon. They came home to the same house that had once been her silence and his emptiness, and slowly they turned it into a home. Arya began teaching free music lessons to children at a nearby community center. She didn't put up signs or post online, but the kids found her. One child brought another, and then another. Some couldn't even read yet, but the moment their fingers touched the keys, their eyes lit up like morning light. Lucas, meanwhile, started a medical aid fund for undocumented immigrants. He called it the Luna Foundation, named after Arya's daughter. No press, no big announcement, just a quiet effort that helped dozens of people choose healing over hiding. They didn't try to become something grand. They were just two people who had once lost everything, now choosing to rebuild, with kindness, with presence, with love that didn't need to shout. One late afternoon, Arya came home from teaching. Her hands still had flecks of watercolor, left by a little girl who'd painted a piano in bright, impossible colors. She found Lucas in the front yard, assembling something beneath the maple tree. "What are you doing?" she asked, wiping her hands on a small towel. Lucas turned and smiled, rope in hand. "A swing," he said. "For who?" She tilted her head, half smiling, half curious. He paused, glancing up at the canopy above. The golden sunset warmed his face in a soft, forgiving light. "For us," he said. "For today." Then he looked at her gently. "For tomorrow?" A gust of wind passed through the tree, making the leaves flutter gently. One small maple leaf landed in Arya's palm, golden, warm, and trembling. She smiled, held it close to her chest. "Maybe, for her too," she whispered. Lucas didn't ask who she meant. He already knew. Arya stepped closer, resting her head on his shoulder. The evening breeze passed through them, carrying the scent of grass, music, and something deeply simple. A home they had chosen to stay in together.